Putin has been charged with by the ICC for war crimes. So this is maybe part of the distraction. They don't want you to see that Putin is meeting with Xi Jinping and that that China is brokering world peace all around the globe, it seems, as they brokered a peace deal between Saudi Arabia and Iran, and now they're working on one with Ukraine and Russia. They're wanting to distract from all of this, it seems. And now the news is from the West that the ICC, which is not recognized by the United States, but it is recognized by all of the other Western European nations and all the NATO nations, essentially, they've charged him. Now, what have they charged Putin with? Why is there an arrest warrant for Vladimir Putin? And will that actually mean anything? Would he be arrested? Well, yes, he would be arrested if he travels to certain countries. If he travels to one of the many nations that do recognize the International Criminal Court, they would be obligated legally right then and there to arrest him and to send him off to The Hague. But many countries are not in that. But of the 193 United Nations members, there are 70 countries that do not recognize the ICC, but there are 123 that do. So that's a lot of countries he's not able to travel to, one of them being South Africa. And he's actually scheduled to visit South Africa in August for a BRICS meeting to talk about BRICS. And that is something that now South Africa is questioning. And if anything, the ICC putting these charges out against Vladimir Putin is really just, I think, going to end up being sort of a death sentence for many of the nations that are in the ICC. They're just going to back out. They're going to say, we're not going to be arresting Vladimir Putin if he shows up. So we're just not going to be a member state anymore of the ICC. That's where I see this going more than anything. But South Africa certainly is thinking about this, and most likely they're going to be exiting the ICC because they do not want to ostracize Vladimir Putin from a BRICS meeting that they're planning to have. It's the 15th BRICS summit where heads of state from Brazil, Russia, India, and China are expected to attend. My guess is they're going to let him attend by getting out of the ICC. So let's talk about the charges. What is he being charged with? Well, according to the document here, says today, 17th of March, 2023, pretrial chamber 2 of the International Criminal Court issued warrants of arrest for 2 individuals in the context of the situation in Ukraine, Mr. Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin and Miss Maria Alexievna Lvova-Belova. They are charged with kidnapping children, essentially. They say that the president of the Russian Federation is allegedly responsible for the war crime of unlawful deportation of population, children, and that of unlawful transfer of population, children, from occupied areas of Ukraine to the Russian Federation. The crimes were allegedly committed in Ukrainian occupied territory, at least from the 24th of February, 2022. There are reasonable grounds to believe that Mr. Putin bears individual criminal responsibility for the aforementioned crimes for having committed the acts directly, jointly with others, and or through others, and for his failure to exercise control properly over civilian and military subordinates who committed the acts or allowed for their commission and who were under his effective authority and control pursuant to superior responsibility of the Rome Statute. So they're saying, and then they say the same thing about Miss Maria Alexievna Lvova-Belova. So they say they've kidnapped children, that these children, when interviewed, the authorities with the ICC said that the children were in orphanages and in children's homes, that in Ukraine, in the occupied territories of Ukraine, so that could be areas of Donbass, that could be Mariupol, that could be all of the areas where Russia has now occupied, that these children were in orphanages and children's homes. So they had no parents. They were not living with their families. They were in orphanages. Russia took them, and the ICC recognizes that these children have since been adopted by Russian families in Russia. How dare they? How dare those Russians take children who were homeless and familyless and suffering in war and potentially subject to shelling and bombing? How dare they take them out of there and give them proper homes in Russia? These children, by the way, these Ukrainian children, were Russian speaking. So these are children that live in the more Russian dominant area of Ukraine on the eastern side, where the people are ethnically and culturally more Russian. They speak Russian. They practice, they're Russian Orthodox. They, by all accounts, identify as Russian. And now these claims have actually been made for a long time. They've now just finally done a formal, actual charge and issued an arrest warrant for Putin over this crime of giving children homes. But they'd been investigating this for quite some time, had been hearing about this for quite some time. The alternative and what they felt like should have happened instead was either the children stayed in Ukraine because they felt like they're using the term genocide. So we see this thrown around a lot where they say, oh, this is a genocide. You're converting Ukrainians into Russians, and that's how you're going to get rid of Ukraine. This is a form of genocide. We hear this against China all the time, where they say you're erasing, it's not a real genocide. You're not killing anybody in this particular instance, but you're erasing their culture. So it's a cultural genocide, whatever that means. And so, how dare you take them, like for China, they accuse them with the Uyghurs. They say, well, you're forcing the Uyghurs who live in China to learn Chinese, to learn Mandarin Chinese. How dare you force them to learn the language of their country? It's like, my family, Vietnamese refugees, when we came here to America, guess what language I had to learn in school? English. I live in America. How dare they do that to me? It was total cultural genocide. I should just be speaking Vietnamese and knowing no English living in America. So these kids speak Russian. They lived in Russian occupied or culturally Russian areas. It makes sense they would be adopted by Russian families. But instead, what the ICC wanted was for them to either stay in Ukraine or they wanted them to be adopted by European families and shipped out into Europe, where these kids would have to learn a brand new language. They would be with people culturally, ethnically, and linguistically different from them, but instead they're in a place where they would feel more at home, quite frankly. But apparently that's a war crime. That's an interesting war crime. It's not one I would have considered a war crime, quite frankly. I would have thought that if you do wage war on a country, which Russia is doing, absolutely waging war on Ukraine, that you would then need to be responsible for the people in that region and the rebuilding of that region. It seems to me it's a war crime to do the opposite, to let children sit in orphanages and to let the places that you've bombed remain in ruin. It seems that it is your responsibility to go in, make sure those children are cared for, and to rebuild. That's what Russia's doing, and apparently they're classifying it as a war crime. What's interesting, though, is The Hague actually went to the Pentagon, to the United States, and said, hey, will you help us with the investigation? We could use some of your information against Vladimir Putin so that we could build this criminal war crime case against him. And what does the United States say? Well, according to the New York Times, we don't have this article for you, but I'm just going to read it for you here. The Pentagon, this is the New York Times, came out March 8th. The Pentagon is blocking the Biden administration from sharing evidence with the International Criminal Court in The Hague gathered by American intelligence agencies about Russian atrocities in Ukraine, according to current and former officials briefed on the matter. American military leaders oppose helping the court investigate Russians because they fear setting a precedent that might help pave the way for it to prosecute Americans. You don't say, as we sit here today on the anniversary of the invasion of Iraq. You don't say, as we perpetrated a massive killing of hundreds of thousands of people in Iraq, a torture campaign, and did it all under the guise of weapons of mass destruction, which we found out were a complete lie. So the Pentagon at least did make one smart move, right, by saying, maybe we shouldn't help you because if you do investigate, we know we're war criminals. So we don't want you to then start prosecuting us. At least they admit it. At least they admit it. And this is why the United States is not a member of the ICC. There's many countries that are not members of the ICC, including China and India and 70 other nations. But the United States, Israel, China, India, Russia, all not members of the ICC. And because, quite frankly, there tend to be the more war, the countries that do expand, the imperialistic countries that wage war, that go around and and dominate and harass and kill people for no real good reason except to expand the military-industrial complex for people like Boeing and Lockheed Martin and Raytheon to make boatloads of cash, and all of the banks that go along with that and all of the other contractors. There's a lot of money in war, and we know that, and that is why we don't want to be held accountable for our crimes. So I thought that was pretty interesting in that whole entire saga. So we will see what happens with the ICC and Putin's criminal charges. They will stand, of course. You know, they're not going to drop those charges. They are seemingly pretty ridiculous charges. If anything, he should be applauded for at least giving those children homes. But, and also, by the way, a lot of those children were in areas when they were orphaned. The war, it was the Ukrainian military was fighting against the Russians. The Russians and the civilians in a lot of those areas were really on the side of the Russians. And the Ukrainian military was targeting and killing and ended up bombing areas where families got hit and parents were killed and children were orphaned. A lot of that was the work of the Ukrainian military. And so, yes, it would be the obligation of whoever is there occupying that area to ensure those children are cared for. And the Russians did that, and that is a war crime. I have no doubt war crimes are being committed in this war. War is ugly. Both sides commit atrocities. That's how war is. When we look back at even the war that was waged between my two countries, Vietnam and the United States, the war crimes happen on both sides. War is very ugly, and it brings out the worst in people. And we see that. And we see that, you know, we think they're the good guys, but then you find out these massive atrocities happen and people were killed and innocent women and children, and you get these horrible images in the end. War is a terrible thing. And that is why so many of us want to see an end to this war and an end to many others. And the one way, myself as an American, I am not a Russian, so I cannot speak for how the Russian people are treating this, what they're asking their government to do. It is that is between them and Vladimir Putin. But I am an American, and what I can ask for is for my government to stop funding and continuing to increase this war, to marching us closer into World War III. That is what I can ask my government to do, to instead try to facilitate peace, to seek a peaceful negotiation, that will include Ukraine losing land to Russia. That's just the way it's going to be. That was inevitable from the beginning. We knew they were at least going to annex the Donbass. And that would have been a good opportunity to then go and actually ask for a peaceful resolution on this somehow, some way. But instead, we have just continued to continue and increase as we give even more money to Ukraine, which there was more money announced. And this is where we're at with this. So we will keep you posted on everything, of course, on this show. And thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for being here. Really appreciate your support. Let's now talk about the sponsor for today's show, Field of Greens. It's a great product that keeps me in my tip-top shape mentally so that I can ask the questions that you expect me to ask, right? I get all of my fruits and vegetables, guys. That's how I do it. And I do it through Field of Greens, which is an organic powder that is no extracts whatsoever in this. You just mix it into your drink or you mix it into your food, and you're going to get your power pack of all those fruits and vegetables, all the nutrients you need through that Field of Greens powder. It's not the cheapest stuff in the world, I'm not going to lie to you, but it's very high quality and it tastes good. I really like the lemon lime flavor. I mix it into my ice water and it tastes like green tea with lemon. It's delicious. So try that out. Go to fieldofgreens.com, enter the promo code Kim to get 15% off your first order. That is fieldofgreens.com. Use the promo code Kim.